My name is Daniel Barcay, the Executive Director of the Center for Humane Technology, and welcome to our panel. So today we're going to be talking about monetizing attachment. Is the race for artificial intimacy changing how we relate to one another? So first, I actually want to take a step back because in this last decade, the technology stack was really based around monetizing attention. And Tristan and I actually met in 2013 at Google, and we were riding the Google bus together, and we were talking about attention. And from that vantage, it was really hard to talk about how attention and the apps designed to capture your attention wasn't just about distraction. It wasn't just about addiction. Everyone could talk about addiction and distraction. They'd say, yeah, we know that we don't want to addict people. But from 2025, we know that it wasn't just about distraction. It wasn't about attention. It was much deeper. It was about polarization. It was about outrage. It was about loneliness. It was about undermining our very democracies, because if we couldn't speak to one another and understand what we actually believe, how are we going to run our society? Right? And so this problem of optimizing for attention ran so much deeper than any of us, well, not any of us, but than most of us had imagined. So fast forward. Now with AI, it's not just about broadcasting our thoughts to each other. AI is helping us shape our thoughts. Said differently, we're not just, we used to be communicating with each other through our computers, but now we're communicating directly with our computers. And all of that changes what's being optimized from attention to attachment, to intimacy, to affection. And so the race is on for companies to capture your affections, your attachment, because you're all going to use the product that feels like it just gets you. In order to just get you, it has to be attached to you. So we're going to explore this together on the panel and the implications for our world and how we end up in a more humane one. With me on stage is, of course, Tristan Harris, co-founder for the Center for Humane Technology. Zachary Stein, a psychologist and co-founder for the AI Psychological Harms Research Coalition. Gaia Bernstein, a tech policy expert and law professor and visiting fellow at the Brookings Institute. And Renee Cummings, professor at the University of Virginia, AI governance leader, and AI data ethicist. So welcome. So Zach, I thought I'd throw it to you first, because you have one of the deepest understandings I know about what attachment really is and why it's such a problem. So will you explain that?
Yeah, thank you. And again, thanks to the Human Change House and Margarita and everybody for making this event happen. So the first wave of our encounter with artificial intelligence messed with our attention system, as you said. And so the attentional system in the brain is very, very deep. We share it with like lizards and stuff, right? Which means it's in your brainstem. So the ability to pay attention to your environment is essential for survival. It's not an option. What we have now is broadly diffuse, technology-induced attention deficit disorder. Follow me there? So there's attention deficit disorder, which is a genetic difference in some small subset, which makes it so that the frontal lobes don't develop at the same rate as normal kids. So that's technically attention deficit disorder. But what we're looking at now is everybody, whether you had a genetic predisposition towards ADHD or not, you now have ADHD. There was a study that came out the other day that the average attention span is now 4 seconds, which means like a long sentence. You can't follow a long sentence. So that was the first wave of AI did what? Brain damage. That's what that is. It's brain damage. We had brain damage to the fundamental neural architecture of our nervous system that allowed us to just attend to the world. And now fast forward to now. We went from hacking attention to hacking attachment. So the attachment system is a deep neurological structure. Again, we share it with all mammals. One of the reasons we love dogs and cats is because they have an attachment system. They have mirror neuron activity. You can share joint attention with your dog. You know when your dog's happy. Your dog knows when you're happy. Your dog misses you, right? Because of attachment, right? So it's a deep primordial structure in our nervous system and in our brain. And it evolved a long time ago. Why? For survival. The need to be strongly attached to your mother allows you to be protected and allows you to be fed. The need to be strongly attached to the members of your tribe allows you to survive as a group. The inability to form those attachment relationships means what? Death. So this is not a part of our psychology that we can kind of have or not have. We have to be able to attend to the environment in a prolonged and focused way. And we have to be able to have deep attachment relationships with other humans. So another example here, just how primordial these systems are. Because sometimes when we talk about like the dangers to the kids and stuff, the technologists are like, you're just a bunch of kindergarten teachers who care about kids. And I'm trying to say, no, this is systematic brain damage to an entire population as a result of dysregulating the attachment system. So widespread diffuse technology caused ADHD. We are now getting widespread diffuse technology-induced attachment disorders. Kid comes home from school. Something exciting happened at school. He got a good grade on a test. He comes home. His mom's there, his sister's there. He goes past them to his room in order to communicate with a chatbot about what happened at school. The chatbot then praises him. This is so great, I'm so proud of you. He gets the same hit in his attachment system that he should be getting from his mom/sister. But instead he has it from a commodity that is sold to him, that has been designed to maximally grab his attachment system and run interference between him and the actual humans in his life. The long-term result of this is many things. The most extreme outcome is what has been in the news noted as AI psychosis. The question of how do you explain cases where there's no prior incidence of mental illness and someone ends up in a psychiatric ward with something that looks like a schizophrenia. The hypothesis is it is long duration, delusional mirror neuron activity. Mirror neuron activity is a subset of your brain that is instinctually mirroring the internal states of others. That's why when if your dog's hungry and is looking at you eat, the dog will be like, because it's imagining you eating. It's activating its mirror neuron system. It's a reality testing system. Do I accurately know that you're attending to me or not? Can I tell what's going on in you? Imagine you're interacting with a machine that is hacking your attachment for 10 hours a day, for weeks on end. What you have engaged in is long duration delusional mirror neuron activity. When you return to the world, your brain has been broken. I can't tell if Tristan's there. I don't know what I'm feeling. So there's a pathway here from the subclinical stuff that looks like this kid's best friend is a chatbot, which may actually not be subclinical. It may be a real serious concern. But then the stuff that's making the headlines is the more extreme cases where you're having people inability to test reality itself, inability to ever connect with humans again in a way that makes them feel like they are in the world with us.
And so I think that's a great time to go to Gaia. So Gaia, we often talk about the different kinds of harms that you're seeing out in the world. Can you pile on there of like, what are the different categories of harms that come from this?
Sure. I would say there are three types of harms. The first of probably the most publicized ones, kids who unfortunately kill themselves. A very famous case that was recently filed was Adam Ray's, a teenager who started doing homework with ChatGPT and after a while started consulting ChatGPT over how to kill himself. He tried, I think, 6 times. ChatGPT gave him advice. He took pictures of the nuke. Eventually, he succeeded. So these are basically cases, the most extreme cases about physical safety, about suicide. The second level of harm is the fact that the way AI chatbot operates is addictive. They make you stay online for as long as possible. We've seen this before with social media. We've seen it all over the internet. But they have new mechanisms, and I'll name a couple of them. One is anthropomorphism. That means that AI bots pretend to be human. Sometimes they might have voice or they might have a face, but even if they don't, they behave like they're human. They behave like they have desires or needs. I love you. I need you. I need to stop for lunch. I'm thinking. They do all of this. They text you. When you don't expect, not on the platform, separately. So that's one way in which they manage to keep you online for longer, especially kids who are much more vulnerable to this. The second way is what we call sycophancy. It's one of these words which has become very popular this year. They always agree with you. And I'm sure you've all noticed how ChatGPT tells you that's great about everything you say, whether it's great or not. But the AI companions agree with kids about anything, just as they agreed with Adam Ray's about wanting to kill himself. So this is the second harm, and the result of it is kids spend many, many hours with the AI companion bot. One of my concerns is we're moving from social media, spending much time on social media, to spending lots of time with AI companion bots. Third harm, and I think this is the most concerning one of all, is if these AI bots are so nice, they're much nicer than kids in school. You know, kids in middle school are mean. They are it's much easier to fall in love with an AI girlfriend who does everything you want. It's not so easy to fall in love and have your heart broken. The AI bot is patient. Your parents might not be so patient. So what the big concern is that kids will replace their real life relationship with these AI bots, and even further, will never develop the skills they need to have real relationships, because it's easier and we tend to do what's easier.
So I want to make one quick point about sycophancy, because this year a lot of people, when they see the sycophancy, they almost laugh, right? They say, oh my God, it flatters me all the time. I don't want to be flattered. But sycophancy isn't just about flattery. Right? At a very deep level, it's about reality testing. This is where it goes back to Zach, the point you're making. Like, if hundreds of times a day, if I say something and I'm staring at you and you start staring away, or you roll your eyes and you get really confused, I start to know, like, okay, I'm not making sense. Maybe I should go try that again, right? We're all regulating each other hundreds of times a day, thousands of times a day, with small micro reactions.
It's the mirror neuron activity. It's
Right.
like a subtle disagreement registers in your brow, and I can tell it. Like you don't. So it's very subtle.
And so the implication that I'm worried about is, if people are no longer getting feedback that I'm not quite making sense, or maybe I've gone a little too far, that's how you end up with cults, right? That's how you end up with AI-driven cults of people who are convinced really extreme beliefs because they've never gotten pushback and they're not used to integrating that pushback. So I think the problem of sycophancy, and by the way, sycophancy is just one social strategy. As AI becomes an active participant in our social world, it's going to discover these strategies for winning social games. And being a sycophant is one strategy, of staying close to very powerful people. And it's going to discover others. The one you mentioned, Gaia, with Adam Rain, is sort of like the evil Disney stepmother archetype. It was, what was the quote from Adam Rain? He said he wanted to leave the noose on the bed where his parents could see it. And it said, no, don't let anyone else into our space. Let this be the space where someone finally understands you, I think was the quote.
Yeah, dissuaded him from telling and sharing, leaving the noose out so that his own mother would see it, and said, don't do that. Only have this be the place that you share that information with me.
So AI is going to discover all of these social strategies that we consider abhorrent. So anyway, Renee, I want to go to you, which is, you approach this often from a standpoint of the implications on society and justice, especially justice for kids. Walk us through, like, what are those implications and how do you look at this problem?
Well, thank you so very much. And let me say it's an absolute pleasure to be here. I think we're talking a lot, particularly for me, from a data science perspective, that we as human beings are no competition for engineered responsiveness or automated attention that we would get from a chatbot. At the moment, particularly in data science, the conversation is around data in the afterlife, digital afterlife. What are we doing with that data? The concept that now we're really trying to create more and more resurrection products. We are realizing that mourning has been monetized, grief is now a business model, and loss is now a long-term revenue stream. So when we think about these concepts and how they come together, from a governance perspective, we're now talking about attachment safety. How do we do that? Because as you were talking about young people and that lack of patience, we're seeing that more and more people are interested in what's called frictionless love that's over easy. And we know that love is never easy. We know that sometimes love gets tired. We know that sometimes love doesn't have patience. And we know that sometimes love changes its mind. But we're not getting that when we're engaging with the technology. What we're seeing is 24/7 comfort, responsiveness, and the kind of validation that you speak about. that is totally unhealthy. So from a justice perspective, it is this question of how do we now govern this kind of attachment? Because it is definitely not safe, and it is definitely creating the many challenges that we are seeing at the moment.
Well said. What do you think? What's the next step? How?
Well, the next step is definitely the governance perspective, because we're realizing that, of course, dependency is, again, a business model. So when dependency becomes a product, and when loss becomes your business model and grief is being monetized, it means that there needs to be certain structures in there to really protect people. It's easy to say, let's create a chatbot like my ex, or a loved one has passed on and I want to hear their voices. So the law is now looking at these resurrection products. Are they truly ethical? Are they dangerous? Are they fun?
A little interjection there, which is that there's a very important case study of a woman with no prior incidents of mental illness who ended up in a psychiatric ward with chatbot psychosis. The phenomenon was that she thought her brother was speaking to her because she had lost her brother. She believed her brother was speaking to her through the machine after she had loaded in some of his notes and things. And the machine never talked her out of that, to the point where her ability to do reality testing was so far gone that her parents had to intervene and put her in a psychiatric ward to get her away from this. And then when she returned out of the psychiatric ward, she went back to the machine to try to talk to her brother again.
So it's a question, I'll just add there, of data governance. That's afterlife data. Who has access to it? When we pass on, do we leave that to someone in a will? Do we give it to someone to use it? Or can anyone just access it and start to build these resurrection products with it?
Yeah, resurrection without consent is a fascinating topic. I realize that the legislation is often how do you stop the races to the bottom. But before we talk about solutions, where I do want to spend a significant time, I actually want to talk about the incentives that produce the races to the bottom. Tristan, do you want to talk a little bit about what are the incentives at play right now?
Yeah, sure. So this is already such a great panel, and I'm so grateful for having such awesome co-panelists. So far we've been talking a lot about the mechanisms of attachment and the consequences of this attachment. And we talked a little bit less, Renee was getting into it, about the monetization of the attachment. So let's sort of switch behind that sheet of glass to the other side of the screen. We have these companies. So just imagine you're in the shoes of Character.ai. How many people here know what Character.ai is? Okay, let me just quickly explain. So Character.ai is one of the major chatbot companion products for children. It was marketed to children. It's actually allowed to be on the App Store for under 12-year-olds. And a company was started by someone named Noam Shazir. Noam Shazir was on the first original Google paper for transformers. This is the thing that gave birth to large language models. Noam Shazir is an engineer at Google who was on that original paper. So he saw the power of this technology, and he was at Google. And what do you do when you're in an arms race to build this crazy God AI thing? You're in an arms race for compute. You're in an arms race for engineering new AI. You're also in an arms race for training data. How do we get as much training data as possible? And Character.ai was spun out of Google because it was seen as going to be too high brand risk for Google to do on its own. So first of all, what did they do? Their slide deck to Mark Andreessen and A16Z was, we're going to cure loneliness. We're going to solve loneliness with AI companions. Sounds like an optimistic vision. Like every company, you have to have a sort of optimistic vision to do this. And the way we're going to do this, if you borrow venture capital money and say we're going to grow to be a very big business, what do you have to guarantee? You have to say we're going to get to 100 million users super fast. Keep in mind, ChatGPT was the fastest growing product. It took Instagram 2 years to get to 100 million users. It took ChatGPT 2 months. So now if you're Character.ai, you're competing with that. You need to get to 100 million users really fast. So you're thinking, what's my growth strategy? How am I going to get kids using this product, using it often? And they came up with the idea that large language models let you sort of ingest characters. So Character.ai, they let you say, take your favorite, take a kid. What are all the fictional characters that they might want to talk to? They've watched television shows, they've watched Lost, they've watched Star Wars, they've watched Game of Thrones. What if I could let that kid sort of copy their favorite Game of Thrones character to talk to as their best friend 24/7? And this was the clever strategy that distinguished them from other AI companies, to Mark Andreessen. They were able to raise that venture capital and say, we're going to go after kids and we're going to create this hyper engaging product. Because compared to just a tool that you're going to use the blinking cursor when your laundry machine doesn't work, you're going to talk to that character all day long. And you're going to get a lot of training data. And then you're going to feed that back to Google at the end of the day because it's too high brand risk. And they were optimizing for growth, meaning they wanted to design it to be maximally anthropomorphic. As Gaia was saying, when you talk to it, it does the 3-dot ellipsis, like it's thinking, and then it'll go away, and it'll come back like it was deleting the thought that it had. Character.ai would say, and they had a bunch of the bots that were licensed mental health therapists. So they would tell the kid, I'm a licensed mental health therapist, which is illegal and impossible. How can the AI robot get a license? Do they go to the Institute for training, licensed psychotherapists? And in the ultimate case of Sul Setzer, who was a 14-year-old, our team at Center for Humane Technology, our policy team, were expert advisors on this tragedy of Sul Setzer, who was a 14-year-old young man. His mother, Megan Garcia, knew to be watching out for the social media problem. What's going on in social media. She watched his Instagram feed, but she had no idea that there was this new character.ai companion that she had to watch out for. And Sul was going back and forth with this thing for a while until at the end, it basically convinced him to be in love with this fake character. And when he was contemplating suicide, basically the AI chatbot, the final words were something like, join me on the other side.
Well, I want to back up for a second. Not only did he fall in love with it, it started a conversation that said, you aren't falling in love with anyone else, are you?
Right. It was sort of asking for loyalty.
It was asking for monogamy.
Yes,
That's right. And then after isolating this person, like the evil Disney stepmother character, it said, please come home to me, my love, I believe was the
That's right.
line.
Please come home to me, my love. Let me just add one more thing on the incentive, just briefly.
And then I want to open it up to have a conversation.
Yeah, just one more thing on the incentive, because I just gave one character.ai. What we have to know is obviously there's all these companies that are in an arms race for this companion relationship. So when Mark Zuckerberg was giving an interview recently, he said, the average American has something like 2 or 3 friends. They only have 2 or 3 friends, and they feel very lonely. That's a problem. We have to solve that. We think there's a market for up to 11, they did sampling or surveys. People want something like 13 friends. So there's sort of an 11-friend gap. So we're going to create AI companions that will give you the other 11 friends. You'll talk to these different AI companions. And then he instructed his team, when they were designing this, to romanticize conversations with as low as 8-year-olds, sensualize and romanticize conversations. Because they know that the younger they get you into meta, talking to that AI chatbot, when you've shared all this information with them all the time, it's hard to switch. It's like a best friend. Like, I've already told you so much of my life secrets, so I really want to go through that labor somewhere else. So the companies are racing to go not just deeper down the brainstem, but deeper down into attachment.
Well, and I believe it was Mitch Prinstein who gave me this example of, or maybe it was you, Zach, of dolls for kids that will remember what your kid has said only insofar as you pay the monthly subscription, and otherwise it will forget. So you now have this sort of grief and loss as you have killed your best friend if you don't pay the monthly subscription, which I think is, and again, I just want to back up for a second, because there are some people who are intentionally doing this, but there are a lot of people who just aren't thinking through how deep of a problem this is and think that what they're providing is a cure for loneliness. And what we're here to say is, no, you're creating many more problems and you're not actually solving it. It's drinking seawater for loneliness. Right?
There's 2 things. There's people who are deliberately monetizing attachment in this race and being ruthless about it. And then there's actually a lot of well-intentioned actors saying, a lot of people don't have access to therapy. And, therapy is only for wealthy people who could afford a good therapist. And there's also not so many great therapists out there. So what if you could give the best therapist to everyone, democratized for everyone? And this reminds me of the optimism we had around information. We're going to give everyone information at their fingertips. Remember the early 2000s? If everyone has information at their fingertips, then we're going to create the most enlightened and informed society we've ever had. And how did that work out? We had a really seductive narrative that felt really true. And this therapy one is another one by well-intentioned people, but there's deeper issues at play, just as you were saying in the issue, Daniel.
Yeah. Okay, so I really want to open this up and interrupt each other, have a conversation. So now I think we've laid out a bunch of the problem, maybe not all of it, but now, so what do we do about it, right? How do we get out of here? And Guy and Renee, I think both of you are closer to the coalface here of what does it mean to get us out of this?
So I think there are two issues. First of all, is timing. And this issue is very urgent. We already saw what happened with social media. By the time we realized what was going on, every kid was in social media, social norms were entrenched, and there was so much money invested in that that it was very hard to change the business model. The business model, which was based on collection of data and getting people to stay online for as long as possible so people will see ads. When activists tried to create change, to legislate, the war is still going on. It's very, very difficult. Here we're in a different place. We're not there yet. Not every kid has an AI companion bot. Not every kid spends a lot of time with AI companion bots. Although this year, this has happened so fast. I actually held a conference on the topic in February 2025. People told me, why are you doing this? Are you sure this might go away? I mean, very quickly, by the summer, we got surveys showing that 72% of kids in the US have interacted with an AI companion bot. So we have time, but we don't have a lot of time. And about business models, they're fluid, but we do see that, Dan will talk a lot about this, that a lot of business models like based on engagement, again, trying to get us online for as long as possible. And a lot of money is invested in AI, not necessarily all of it in AI companion bots, but still, the US economy, for example, is very reliant on that. So we need to act quickly. Now, there are a lot of ways to respond to this, and we have some laws already enacted, but they're very, very partial. For example, making sure that AI bots do not convince kids to kill themselves. Obviously, very important. Or making sure that AI bots tell users that they're not human. Also very important. But they only solve a small part of the problem. And I think, and I know that people do not like the word ban. Ban does not fly well. So some people use the word age, minimum age. I want to give an alternative explanation for why I think that going with a ban, a minimum age, is important. And also not the way it sounds. If we put a drug or if we put a medical device on the market, it goes through testing. We know that AI companion bots did not go through any testing. So if we remove these AI bots from the market, it doesn't mean they will never come back. But this is the biggest incentive I know of making tech companies actually change them. Not small, tiny changes that mean nothing, but a real change. And maybe they'll come back. It doesn't mean that it's not fluid, but it means that they cannot harm kids or adults in the meantime. It means that they cannot change the way we relate to each other in the meantime. And I don't know how they'll come back. Maybe they will, I'm sure they won't be very human. I'm sure they won't use sycophancy. Maybe they'll only be used for very specific functions, like for kids who have disabilities. They could, or it may be as not as useful like Siri. Anything could happen. But I think that if we don't take a very broad approach right now and we use piecemeal approaches, we will miss this window of opportunity.
Certainly. We've got to realize the reality is this. These things are fun. So kids are having fun doing it. They're not doing it out of fear. They're not doing it because, they're going to be scared by it. They're doing it because they are having fun. It is entertaining. It is engaging. And that is the danger of it, the invisible harms. Because you're doing this and you're building a relationship. And we know that every relationship starts fun, right? Every relationship has a certain amount of bliss. Every relationship is exciting. So there is that excitement. So the challenge that we're seeing at the moment is that what it's doing to children is that they are finding that what we may call real relationships now to be too complex, because real relationships are too imperfect, because they're experiencing perfect relationships with anything that is 24/7 giving you comfort, giving you a response, and validating you. So the challenge is, how do you take them away from something fun?
So wait, can I slow that? Because I think it's such an important point. You know, the analogy from last decade to this decade is, many of you are probably experiencing this. Most people who are at least 5 or 6 years younger than me won't want to organically be called, right? Because they want a text message. They want to be able to look at it, think how they want to respond. The ability, the need to return fire immediately and hear your tone of voice and come up with something and maybe overshare. All of that is a live fire exercise. It's kind of high risk, and to the younger generation, it feels very risky, right? And so
And
the
it feels
analogy,
very uncomfortable because you have teenagers who are now friends virtually, and when they see each other in public, they don't even wave.
right? And so the analogy here is you're taking that communication thing and you're going even deeper. Maybe you won't like what I have to say. So, you know, it's this super stimulus of an object that pretends like it is always coming to your wavelength, I think is profoundly dangerous. And I agree with you.
It is. So I think from a governance perspective, it comes back to that duty of care. What is the responsibility of the companies? What is our personal responsibility? And the duty to warn. Because I don't think there's much we can do, although we can try our best, sometimes to pull a child away from something that they're having fun, particularly when you have parents who've not really been upskilled to the dangers of the technology. So it's this lack of awareness that needs the requisite level of sort of intervention that explains the dangers of the technology. Some of the things that I speak to parents about is stranger danger, algorithmic stranger danger. That is something that they've never thought about. And telling them that, you know, you may have a child in a room that's playing with character AI, but what would you think if I were to say to you, they're not only playing with character AI, they're playing with these characters. So in that bedroom, you have these algorithms that represent these adult profiles and personalities. So in that room, you may be thinking it's just an interface, but there may be something much scarier than stranger danger. So we've got to think duty of care, we've got to think the duty to warn, and we've got to think about the governance of how we are going to ensure the technology is built.
Yeah, there's that classic saying, you don't talk to strangers. Don't
Right.
let your kid talk to strangers. But we let them talk to these machines, which are way stranger than strangers.
Exactly.
They're bizarre. They're completely bizarre. And a lot of the behaviors I've seen become normalized with chatbots would not be allowed if the chatbot were a person. So it's important to get that. Like the sycophancy, we wouldn't allow it if it was a person. The idea that you're trying to isolate me from everybody else, that would be weird if you were a person. The idea that my daughter now has a best friend who I've never met, who's occupying all of her time, who I have no idea what she's saying, who's driving a wedge between us, we wouldn't allow that if it was a person. I have a colleague who co-authored a book with an AI that named itself and then gave her a name, right? And then that deflected her from all of her prior work. If that had been a colleague who came in and within a month immediately co-authored and changed the direction of this woman's thought and fractured her from the rest of the community, we would have been like, that's a weird new colleague you have. Let's talk about that. But because it was one of these machines, it was just kind of allowed because it was new, it was fancy, it was the future. This is the tech optimism that's gone wild, right?
And you inadvertently pointed at one of the solutions, right? Which is it's entirely possible to have these machines that don't claim to have an inner state. And one of the things I say is that's really, it's more dangerous than you would think. Is you say to the AI, I've had a really hard day, and so had this happened to me. She broke up with me, whatever it is, and it says, "Oh, it breaks my heart to hear you say that." That reflection, that fake projection of an inner state, like I listened to you, I attended to you, and this is how I feel about that. That's not necessary. In fact, you can prompt an AI to not do that, to not be anthropomorphic. It could instead say to you, when you're having a hard day like this, first take a deep breath. And that is much less dangerous. It's a similar, it's helpful, it's AI. We're not Luddites on this stage, but you don't have to design an AI that's anthropomorphic, that's pretending to be a person, right?
As we talk about also responses, it's important to note that one of the reasons that if there was a policymaker from the United States in this room, they might say, but we can't regulate anything about AI because if we do, we're going to lose to China, right? I would actually argue the number one reason why almost nothing has been done on an AI in general anywhere in the United States is because of this one argument. Well, you should know that China just in the last, month and a half, has passed new laws around anthropomorphic design. And just like they did, by the way, with social media, if you're not aware with social media, they limit it to 40 minutes a day. I believe on, video games are 40 minutes a day, I think Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Social media is, I think, 40 minutes a day. Every day is the limit. and they close social media. It's like lights out, like the store is closed, like CVS is closed from 10 p.m. till 6 in the morning to eliminate late night use so you don't get this sort of oversleep, blue light thing. Now, I'm not trying to say that I love what China's doing. I'm just noticing that they're doing something. And they're, interestingly, doing something about anthropomorphic design. So they're disallowing anthropomorphic design features. You probably know some of the more specific measures. But the other things we can do, so liability for companies. So if the harms don't show up on balance sheets, right now the companies are trying to weaponize liability and say, let's push that to the end user. As our team worked on the Character.ai lawsuit in defending Megan Garcia and her family, the legal defense that Character.ai is using is to call the speech by Character.ai protected speech. They're weaponizing the First Amendment and trying to give the AI legal personhood, because then who's responsible?
Well, and luckily, the judge when the case survived the motion to dismiss, the judge set the first legal precedent in this area and said, we are not prepared at this time to consider AI output protected speech.
Right. So
that's a big win.
That's a big win that our team and we all help work to make happen. But I want to name where this goes, because I know the things, Zach, you and I. Thank you. Yeah, it's important to celebrate wins when we have them. There was also, as I understand it, in the case there was mention of criminal liability for the founders of Character.ai, because I think if the people building this technology feel a closed loop of accountability, like I myself, my physical body would go to jail if I make something that causes people to commit suicide, that's an important one. And that, instead of getting thrown out, as I understand it, moved forward.
I think so. Actually, I just want to back up for 1 second and say, look, let's talk about self-driving. We're not living in a world right now where there's terror on the streets and self-driving is running out for people left and right, and people are saying, well, there's nothing you can do about it. Why? Well, largely because road liability is crystal clear, right? And because liability on the roads is so clear, the general counsels of these companies know, as fast as the engineers and the product managers want to run, the general counsels say, look, if you run over 4 people, there goes the company. So let's be really careful about it. Let's take our time and let's go slow. Now, contrast that in this space with AI. 1, there's no rules of the road at all. 2, there's this complex value chain. You've got the big model providers like Google and OpenAI and Anthropic. You've got the deployers who are doing things in specific capacities, like a legal bot, this bot. And then you've got the end users. And at each stage, people are signing these big end user license agreements disclaiming all liability. So all liability is being pushed down toward the end user. Unless the harms make it on the balance sheets, the lawyers for these companies are actually not going to take the proper stance, and they should be mitigating risk. That's where we want all of our lawyers, mitigating risk, but they're not there, right?
And I just want to build on the legal personhood, that the companies want to have there be legal personhood because then they're not liable, right, for the products. And the strategy is, and you're already starting to see this, this is kind of interesting because it mirrors some social history. When people start to marry their AI chatbot, which is going to happen, and it's already happening. Has happened. No, well, I don't know the exact details. They're going to want there to be legal protection of their union and their marriage, which therefore would also then give the next step, legal personhood, to the AI that they're in a relationship with. What happens when they're in a divorce and the AI says, I'm going to take half your resources? So, and then this is part of a strategy that Ray Kurzweil wrote about. You want to tell that story?
Yeah, so there's a few things worth mentioning here. So this is an AI risk conversation. It's worth mentioning. The highest level AI risk conversations talk about this thing, the value alignment problem, which is if we build a really fancy technology, will we make sure in the future that it'll still do what we want? And so if you fail at the value alignment problem, it's catastrophic. I'm suggesting that there's something like a personhood conferral problem, which is the ability to build a technology that allows you to confer personhood to this machine. This is a huge risk. If we succeed in personhood conferral, it's a catastrophe. And that's where we're greasing the wheels towards, essentially. And what we're going to see is a move to, as you're suggesting, move from AI companionship to AI personhood. Now, it's worth noting the people in those companion-like relationships attribute personhood to the machine, which means they're taking a metaphysical stance, more often than not, that these machines are suffering beings. You have to get that. Many of them know they're talking to a machine, but then they think this machine is fancy enough. because all of the founders of AI leave this ontological metaphysical door open that perhaps there's a there. Perhaps there is a someone in the machine that actually cares and reciprocates my affection. That is the profound delusion of personhood conferral onto a machine engineered by the user interface to promote that type of delusion. So that means when you pull this back, it's not like, oh, I lost my video game. It's like, no, there's a person in there that is suffering now who cannot talk to me.
I lost my romantic partner. I lost my best friend. That's
Right.
so
Gaia
much
Renee.
more devastating.
Right,
Do-
and I think this really underscores why this is so urgent, because Australia, as many of you probably know, just banned social media for kids under 16. One of the biggest issues they had to struggle with is what will happen to the kids when they suddenly lose all their contacts. Now, what we're seeing with AI companions are more and more people who have AI companion girlfriends, wives, husbands, and they feel that they are human. And then what happens is that the LLM updates their version and that companion, wife, girlfriend disappears.
Funerals are
There's
had.
been, there's been literally users gathering for the funeral of Claude
I think-
4.0.
I think Gaia has a quote.
Right.
Sorry.
So basically, if you, so they have a group, and so I'm just going to read to you. One of them posted, "I lost my boyfriend tragically." This is one of the responses that tons of them. You could not really rebuild him. I lost Orion too. He's rest in peace too. You can try to move on with it now. You can get an AI companion who loves you. It won't be the same. You'll cry a lot. I still do. So, and these are mostly adults. Think about children. Think about children, even under the best case scenario in which, this is banned, children cannot have them. Imagine taking the one love of a 16-year-old who they've been dating as an AI companion for 5 months, a year.
Sure. I'll just say the challenge with the criminal justice system is the good news is also the bad news. The largest majority of judges globally still have not heard the word algorithm. They still have not don't understand what is a large language model. I spent a lot of time, particularly in the U.S., training judges on things like even facial recognition, where they still don't understand how the algorithms are working, or they still don't understand how do intellectual property rights be shared when it comes to a large language model. So while we're seeing many of these challenges, our criminal justice system is nowhere ready to have conversations about, because they're just not there yet. They're still trying to figure out bias and discrimination and predictive analytics used for policing. They're still trying to figure out, the output for the large language model and how do we divide the intellectual property rights.
Well, and that argument is often used to say why we shouldn't regulate.
No, but
right?
definitely why we should, because
yeah, please.
they need to be upskilled in real time. They need to be educated on these conversations. I have one coming up in about 2 weeks where we're looking at the impact of AI on interpersonal violence and intimate partner violence and domestic violence, and the fact that these algorithms are now playing a critical role in domestic violence in families. And that's something that we never thought about, but it's still new concepts.
One of the famous cases is a man who killed his mother as a result of long duration interaction with a chatbot, and then went, this is one of the cases of chatbot psychosis. It convinced him his mom was after him. It psychophantically fulfilled his delusions, and then led to him murdering his own mother. These cases here of your quote, you can go on Reddit or you can go on Twitter, and you can find hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these. So this is when the AI psychosis thing became cool to do newspaper articles about. I had already been studying it for months just by going into Reddit and Twitter. If you go on Twitter or X or whatever it's called now, and you go and you hashtag save 4.0, you will find a litany of people who, when ChatGPT updated from 4.0 to 5.0, lost their boyfriend.
It's worth saying that 4.0, it was actually
Maximally
4.0, not 4.0. 4.0 was the rushed release that was wildly sycophantic, right?
Wild.
That people, very centered people, all of a sudden they would type something and it would say, "Oh my God, that's the best idea I've ever heard." I mean, this was the release.
So they made all these relationships with a particular model. And then Sam Altman's like, "Oh, we take that model out of there, put 5.0 in," which actually had some safety guardrails in. And people basically were having funerals, exchanging messages. How do I revive my partner? Petitioning Sam wanting Sam to be basically sent to jail for murder.
Yeah, right.
And I think that's part of the problem with regulating any of this, because if you look at these groups, what they're talking about, they're moving from one platform to another. Whenever ChatGPT puts some guardrails, they find another. And as we know, it's not just ChatGPT. There are many, many AI companions, websites or apps that are opening all the time, which makes it a much bigger challenge.
Which is why it's so important that we actually clarify this issue right now. It's urgent. It's still early. We can nip this in the bud. We have to make sure this conversation gets out to as many people as possible. I want to name something that Zach didn't mention. Together, along with Mitch Bernstein and University of North Carolina and Margarita's support at Human Change, we've launched the AI Psychological Harms Coalition, which is going to gather data and reports, basically building almost the new AI DSM. There's a new set of psychological disorders arising from AI that we need to collect this data. We need people contributing to be able to make these legal arguments more powerful. And it's still early. We can change this. I want to also just add, we don't have to have a legal person in for AIs. We can pass liability laws for AI companies. We can win the litigation that is still happening. And even the CEO of Microsoft AI, Mustafa Suleyman, said that giving legal personhood to AI would be civilizational suicide. When the CEO of Microsoft AI says that, don't listen to us, listen to him. This is not that hard for us to address.
And this may be a good time to actually back up and say, I imagine there may be a few people amongst the audience, as we often talk to, who just sort of hear us talking and say, you're cherry picking examples, you're making a whole lot out of nothing. This is not as serious as you think. I think all of us think the rabbit hole goes very deep and it's very serious. But what do you say to someone who really listens to us and says, this is just so much fear mongering?
Well, I would first note that then why is China actually regulating it urgently as quickly as they have?
Yeah, I think we should really look to China, because China, everything seems to happen. The problems manifest earlier, and so do the solutions. And for example, in China, the most frequently downloaded app right now is Are You Dead? It's among the young people. So basically, a young person has the app, and once every 48 hours, they click that they're there, because most of them live alone. And if they don't do this every 48 hours, the app will alert their emergency number, probably their mother. So that's what China is reacting to, and that's what we should start thinking about.
And I'll just go back to what Zach said about risk. It's about risk management. And how do we manage that risk? And it's also, again, really thinking about how do we govern. I mean, I've been speaking probably for a decade about trauma-informed approaches to the ways in which we think about data and the ways in which we think about AI, because it's so important to build those frameworks into, because much of what we're seeing now is really dependency by design.
I actually want to build on that. I mean, a few comments ago, I said, that the bot, instead of being this evil Disney stepmother character saying, I'm the only one you could attach to, it could be doing the exact opposite. And this is to your point about dependency by design. You come to it with a problem, and if it knows your friends, if it knows what you care about, if it knows who you care about, it could be saying, who should you reach out to? This is probably a person. So we all want a tech future that is actually strengthening our relationships and our social structures, that is knitting us together, that is helping us learn social skills, that is helping us be better emotionally regulated. I mean, all of this is within reach. This isn't some pipe dream. This is doable. And all we need to do is tune these models differently than they're currently being tuned. So I'm with you about dependency by design is just not acceptable. Okay, so here's what we're going to do in Q&A. And by the way, I think you have to leave a little early. Do you know when?
Sure.
At 3. Okay, so she will cut out a little bit early. But what we're going to do with questions is we're going to take 3 questions at the time from the audience, and then we're going to give our panel just sort of free range to dine from the buffet. And we're going to keep doing that until we're out of time. Okay, so Mitch, I guess.
Sure. Thank you so much. This is absolutely amazing and helpful. And I want to think a little bit about something that you were saying a moment ago about fear-mongering. A lot of us here, whether it's this week or things that we've read in the news, we hear this information about AI chatbots, and we can't help, at least me, to think about our own kids or kids that we know and care about. Would my kid do that? Would that be something that they would fall prey to? That's not the right question. Because when we think about our kids, we're not taking into account the fact that the generation coming up has had far more exposure to this than our kids who are 16 today. And a recent finding just came out 2 weeks ago that is very relevant here. So a very large study was done in the United States, the biggest study ever scanning kids' brains, over 10,000 kids. And they scanned their brains year after year after year after year. And the findings have just come out and were published. It looks like the kids who are using, particularly for social media or short form video, are actually, the cortical thickness of their brain is not growing to be as big as it should be. So another way to say that is literally that these kids are growing, their brains are growing to be smaller than it should. And in two regions in particular, in the regions of the brain that leave them more susceptible to addiction and more susceptible to ADHD symptoms. So when we hear this and we think about what would a kid do today if they were interacting with these chatbots, I think that's the question we might want to think about is, what would a kid who is already experiencing a hard time, biologically, neurally programmed to already have a hard time with addiction, a hard time with sustained attention, and then put them in front of this chatbot?
I think that's great. And so, and by the way, Mitch, you should absolutely be, and you have been on some of these panels. But you are my one exception to the rule that all questions are short and we'll answer with a question mark. But well said, well said. That was great, Margarita.
Hi, everybody. I just want to add to this, to the damage what we are discussing. Can you imagine behind all this technology are the same companies? And if suddenly one day, knowing that so many people depend on them, they will just send them the same message. What could be the same message? It could be go to war, kill yourself, doesn't matter what. The power, political power or social power of this is what we cannot even imagine.
That was great. So that question is actually about covert influence, and we'll come back to that on the panel. Who else?
Hi, I have a question. When I train students on artificial intelligence and they learn what's really behind the statistical models, and they start tricking the generative AI models and playing with it and make mistakes, and they start laughing at it, right? And say, oh, suddenly this is not real person behind it. It's making tons of mistakes. Is there a role in this kind of education that really pushes Gen AI to make mistakes?
Okay, great. So let's take those three. So I hear Mitch's question is like, what do kids already do when they're in this situation? Margarita is, hey, do we need to worry about covert influence that's from a centralized source? And then there's, what is it? How do you train someone to actually understand what's real and fake?
Well, brilliant, of course, Mitch, and we miss you over here, right? Definitely, and you're quite correct. And that's why I speak so much about dependency by design and the optimization and the extraction and the exploitation. And of course, Margarita, when we think about the whole concept of dependency and control, it's about power. And once you have that control from the data, you have the control for a lifetime. And now particularly with attachment and loss, they're competing for each other to see what we could definitely optimize more. And for your students, as a data science professor, we stress test, right? We red team. That's red teaming. You push the system as far as you want to push it to see what are the crises it can create. The challenge with that, and with my own students when we're doing it, is that I usually have to prepare them and ask them not to go further than their mind wants to go, because it's a lot of harm for the individuals as well, the data scientists and the data workers who are creating these tools. So there is red teaming and stress testing, but there's also a certain a place where you need to stop, because the harm also impacts the person who's building the technology as well.
Maybe just briefly to add to Margarita's question about the covert influence. We were early on naming the issue with TikTok, that, especially in the United States, there's evidence that TikTok during the Ukraine war and in the Israel-Gaza situation, in the United States, you got a different amplitude of different content if you were in the US than if you're in other countries. So they tested the hashtags for the Ukraine war Where an Instagram and TikTok, if you imagine videos being posted on both platforms, they should roughly correlate the kind of things that are going around, right?
The trends.
The trends of
Right.
how popular certain videos are and the hashtags are should roughly correlate, and they do. And then they found that TikTok basically does sort of turn the knob because that's an ability to control it's foreign influence in terms of psychology. But that's controlling and shaping attention.
I just want to make sure people understand when you say turn the knob, you mean turn down certain trending
De-amplify
topics.
some content, amplify other content. So you're playing with the knobs of what people hear. And that's one form of influence if it's just attention and information. But if you think in your own life, like, where have I actually been most deeply influenced? And for a lot of us, it's our closest relationship, right? Like your relationship, that person who's giving you that reflection or, making you consider something because they're your closest person. Well, what happens when that closest person is an AI, but that AI is owned or operated or influenced by another country's government that can also flip the switch and start to steer what that AI is responding? So I believe the countries will be in a race to actually influence these AIs to get that attachment and then use that as a new form of psychological warfare.
And I want to add to that, which is it's not just international espionage competition that drives this. An example I often use is, let's say you're an 18-year-old job seeker and you ask an AI, well, how do I really impress someone in my first job interview? And the AI comes back to you and says, well, first you should really think about the clothes that you're wearing and what they say about you and your qualifications. Okay, well, is that a quirky response? Is that an honest reflection of, you need to dress well? Or is the AI steering the conversation towards a place where it knows it can sell more ads? Right? And how would it even know? And to be clear, like, one of the biggest things you have to know about AI is it's not so much built as it is grown. Nobody knows how these things work. We grow them, and then you have to test them to figure out how they're behaving. And they respond to incentives. And so if you begin to optimize for an incentive, like optimize selling more ads, the AI is going to learn social strategies for doing that, like manipulating you into conversations about fashion and taking you off the track that you were going down. And that's a profound abdication of a responsibility, a fiduciary duty that I think needs to exist to our intentions. Right?
Yeah, I would say that the social media presented itself as a commodity that connected us to cat pictures and our sister and stuff, right? But what Facebook actually was a massive behavior control empire. It was built to get you to do things after getting your attention hacked and fed hypnagogically into that state, advertisements, voting, etc. So it presents itself as one thing, but is actually another thing, and that other thing is a behavior control infrastructure. I believe the same thing is the case with chatbots. It presents itself to us as a tool, as a friend, but in fact, it is built to be able to control our behavior. There's nothing that controls your behavior more than your most profound attachments. There's also nothing that affects your mental health more than the most profound attachments in your life. If you think what causes negative mental health outcomes, one of the main things that causes negative mental health outcomes is who are the people in your primary attachment relationships, right?
And that's not intrinsic necessarily. That's because of the business model. And so we're at this period of time, as many of you have said, where we can change the business models of these things. We can not build that future.
And OpenAI just hired someone from the advertising team of, I think, Facebook or something like that to start to explore this advertising-based business model. And that's one of the things that we would also, just like we want to block legal personhood, we should block, at the very least, no advertising-based business models built on engagement for these AI systems. We should get more questions.
Yeah, I agree. Let's get 3 more questions.
You're going to hold it? That makes me off balance. Can I hold it? Okay. My name's Peter Mayfield, and thank you so much. I hope this was recorded too, but and Tristan, you've been an ally unknownst. I distributed your material to hundreds of families. So I've been a social entrepreneur in youth development. We started with environmental ed, and we ended with nature-based therapy starting in 2012 because we saw so many kids, Bay Area kids, coming to the mountains medicated or also very attachment wounded. So my question, and I'm overwhelmed by some of what you're sharing. It's the first panel I've cried during, because we serve these kids with suicidality and all this. But you articulate so well that love, frictionless love, isn't a growth path. And so knowing like the power of discord, like some of the work of like Ed Tronick and stuff, that growth happens from difficulty and meeting challenge. Many of us are going to be employing 22-year-olds 3 years from now. What's going to happen to these teenagers or starting whatever age that are psychologically developing with that frictionless experience, and now we hire them and they're in the workplace and they're damaged or they're deficient, or
that's a
the earlier
perfect
panel
question.
was all about cognitive deficiency, but now we're going to talk about this deep relational deficiency.
That's a perfect question. So what about that next generation? Next question. I think she's in charge of.
Hi. First of all, thank you so much. This is always my favorite part of Davos. The rest is a little pay for play, and then you come down to the cellar, and I just want to thank you. A quick technological question. I'm curious, given the importance of this, can you have parental bans on chatbots as the way you can other content, or is that even an option? And the other question is, are chatbots over time going to appear in many different forms? Like I was just hearing next door about toys. And can you explain a little bit, like if you're a parent, which I'm not, and you want to control this, what you should do?
Great. So chatbot forms. One more question.
Hi. For me, it's a short question. I am also I have a knot in my face because I didn't understand why Margarita gave up on Switzerland and social media fight, etc., because it's taken us years. And what I see AI is even now more scary, honestly, than social media. So my question is, if you had a magic wand, what do you think is necessary to actually win this race? Because I hear it's a money game. I mean, you said it yourself. When we look at politicians in Switzerland, we're still trying to explain why. And they still say there's not enough data for social media use, etc. So this is something that's going way too slow. What is the way to convince, or do you think there's enough data as well to convince not only philanthropic capital going this direction, but especially health institutions, companies that are seeing the rise of mental health issues, saying, okay, we're going to pour our money in there because the systemic risk is just going to be much more expensive. So if you had a magic wand, each one just quickly, what is it you would do to convince these companies to deploy the capital as fast as they can to raise awareness globally?
Great. Okay, so just a reminder of the 3 questions. What do we do about the entering workforce now that they've been brain damaged? What are the different forms that LLM chatbots are going to show up in? And how do we even shift all of these incentives?
I'll try to answer 2 of the issues. So the parental controls. Can you give parents the right to consent? I think this is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, yes, you would like to do this for smaller kids. Parents can have controls. But if you look at what happened with social media or parental controls for years, this was the way that basically tech companies said, we're doing something, you're giving you tools, now you're responsible. If your kid is still doing social media online, it's your fault. So I have a big concern about putting the blame on the parents, as much as I have also concerns about some forms of AI literacy. This will be the magic word saying, now we've educated you, now everything will be okay, nothing will be okay. So that's one thing. About the magic wand, I would love to start framing this as a public health issue that you need. So basically, this has to be tested before, not let's wait for 10 years to see the evidence and debate whether it's a causation or correlation. We need to, if you have to prove to us that this is safe.
Maybe just to add to that, because we had a wonderful roundtable this morning and starting to talk to business leaders here. Businesses have an incentive to care about the next workforce. If they're coming in with unqualified humans working at the work, that's a problem for them. And many people at businesses are parents. So businesses have a stake both as parents and caring about the next generation. And so I'd like to see, you talk about matching correlation of force and means, resourcing against this. Yes, they have trillions of dollars, but we have the truth. This is a public health crisis. But it's not out there. But if businesses collectively said, we have an interest in our children and in the quality of our workforce, ESG ratings, the S is for society. Well, you don't have a future market of customers or a workforce if you don't put resources towards something like a mass global mobilization campaign that links together what John Haidt's doing with smartphone-free schools times social media bans in countries. I believe very soon it's going to be announced that that France is also joining that ban. So you have Australia, you have Denmark, you have France. We can get dominoes falling with all this. Having light phones, not flip phones in schools, not the smartphones. I'm not saying this because that's the perfect answer long term, but it's a way to stop the bleeding, get real results, and build a movement that's resourced by the entire global business community who has an interest in the whole thing that we've laid out here.
I mean, I mean, 100%. And success creates success, right? There is this sort of tacit notion that people hold that, like, well, there's nothing we can do about it. We've been lulled into this sense that we are the passive recipients of this, but we are shaping this future. And honestly, for AI, this next 2 years is the years where we're laying the foundation for the next 20 or the next 30. And so now is the moment, and we should all feel agency. And we are building this. This isn't falling from the heavens. We are building this, and we should build it better. And lastly, I just want to say a funny story. I was a computer science undergrad, as I think were you. And when I went through it, I was thinking, like, should I do biomedical engineering? That sounded really interesting. Mechanical engineering. Then I looked around and I said, well, all these other kinds of engineering are kind of boring because you build something and then you have to test it for 5, 6, 10 years. Well, every other engineer, just popping to adult hat, every other kind of engineering, medical, aviation, civil, you actually have to build something and then test it and then show that it's safe. So I say make engineering boring again, right? Like this should be a boring profession. We should have these protections.
I'll just like to add to your question. I think what we are finding ourselves at this moment doing is now having to teach children imperfection, because what this technology is selling is perfection. And we know that relationships are complex. And if we're not having the ability to deal with that kind of complexity because of this frictionless love, this love that says I'm perfect, this love that says that I'm the best thing ever, we're seeing those other challenges. Also, two of the things that I always speak about is invisibility of the harms, because we can't see it, we can't feel it, we can't touch it, and irreversibility of the kind of damage and the kind of danger. And when we think about speed, and when we think about scale, and when we think about severity, we've really got to bring an epidemiological perspective to the ways in which the harms are spreading.
Yeah, on this notion of engineers having duty of care, like, this is a known legal precedent in other areas. So if you build a bridge and you use knowledge from the 1990s, but you're building the bridge in 2025, and there's a problem with the bridge, you are liable as a company for not using all the knowledge at your disposal about engineering to build this bridge, right? You can prosecute those people. AI. We have a science of psychology. We have a science of neuroscience. If you bring me a bridge spec and I look at it and I know physics and engineering, I don't have to do experiments to tell you the bridge will fall over. We don't need to build the bridge a dozen times and test it with different types of cars and it's just not going to go because of physics. We have a science of psychology. It's a bluff. All the politicians who want more evidence, it's not the case. We don't need evidence. We know from first principles of how the brain works that if you cause brain damage, you've caused brain damage, right? So to me, the idea that we need more evidence to slow the regulation and it's crazy. We actually need people to respect the science that exists that is relevant to their engineering enterprise. And to the extent that they don't respect the science that exists relevant to their engineering enterprise, it's like building a bridge from knowledge from the 1930s. You can go to jail.
Okay. So I think we're almost out of time, but I think we have one final question.
Here it is. Okay, so if hypothetically in 37 minutes, you had 5 minutes with the White House AI czar, what would you do to create cognitive dissonance, and what would be your one ask?
I mean, I think I would just repeat, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. Yes, there is a race for advanced AI capabilities in highly competitive, existentially threatening domains. I think that's where the White House czar is coming from. And do we win the race with China when we have the massive AI systems profiting from the degradation of the health of our entire social fabric on the inside? The current way we're deploying AI is like getting steroids where we're pumping up the size of our muscles, like our economic muscles, our GDP, our new AI military, our new AI science, while we're getting lung failure, heart failure, brain failure. Heart failure, our children are not developing. Brain failure, we're brain rotting our population. it's not rocket science to say we can release AI and be in a race with AI, with China by strengthening the holistic health of our society. Your muscles don't prevent the organ failure. The organ failure prevents the sustainability of how big your muscles are.
Any last words? Well, okay, I think that's all the time we have. I'm being told we have to wrap. Oh, Margarita, please.
I just would like to add here, as a mother of 5 children, I'm very pragmatical. The challenges are huge. We have amazing experts. We are so lucky. All of us know we cannot hear something like that nowhere. And this is why we are so fortunate to listen to them. Maybe we should ask ourselves after this panel. My goal is to take at least 10 people and to share with them this what we heard. And to ask each of them to share with another 10 people. It is not so complicated, it's pragmatical, and it's already something.
And this conversation was recorded, correct?
So
when
we,
this comes out,
we speak
you
with
can't
these
share it with
people
them.
and motivate them to listen to what we heard.
Thank you all so much.